Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Getting Your Skills Strategy Right. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's get started with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, who is the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Ben Cowan, Director of Skills and Talent Strategy at Degreed. Ben helps clients demystify skills strategy and build impactful skills initiatives. Prior to Degreed, Ben worked as a talent and learning consultant at ZS Associates, a consulting firm specializing in life sciences, and was the director of content development at CorpU, a Philadelphia-based learning technology company. He is passionate about building environments where all employees feel empowered to grow their careers and pursue their passions. In his spare time, Ben loves learning about cooking, music, and the future of work. I would like to extend a thank you to Degreed for sponsoring today's webinar. Degreed is a learning platform relied on by millions of employees from hundreds of global companies to build skills for today and tomorrow. Degreed connects self-directed learning, skill building, education access, and insights so your organization can adapt faster and your people can advance farther. With Degreed, organizations drive agile talent development with better insights and skill data, and employees own their upward mobility through learning experiences and access personalized to their expertise and interests. Founded in 2012, Degreed is headquartered in Pleasanton, California, with additional offices in Salt Lake City, New York, London, Amsterdam, and Brisbane. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. So you can visit certification.brandonhall.com for more information. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see a survey on the list that you'd like to participate in, links will be available in your handout, and you can always visit brandonhall.com for more information. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last but certainly not least, a few logistics. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the question panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be provided to everyone via email within 24 hours of today's webinar. If you would like to download a copy of the presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. The chat is also open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion, share your thoughts as we go through, or simply just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining in from today. And without any further delay, I'll turn things over to Dave so we can dive right in.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. And so, as indicated by the title today and hopefully the registration link that you all read as you signed up, we're going to talk a lot today about skills and the future of work and where things are headed. And I'm really glad to be joined by Ben today. Obviously, Degreed has spent an awful lot of time thinking about this and working with organizations about skills and how to approach them. So we're going to get some really good insights and strategies on how to think about skills and how to move forward and how to build things. So I just wanted to start things off by looking into some of our research, and I'll be sharing some data throughout just to sort of back up some of the thoughts here. But to me, what's really interesting is when we ask organizations, everyone recognizes how important this is, that they're able to build the skills that the business needs, get the organization prepared, future-proofing the business and so forth. But when we ask companies, your current approach to learning, do you think is positioning you well to develop those skills that the business will need in the future? And the results are not great. It's a 5-point scale where 5 would be yes, completely. Our approach is completely preparing us, whereas 1 is that it's not at all preparing us. And you got 37% of organizations giving themselves a 4 or 5, saying we're pretty much or completely prepared. I think if you've got 44%, the biggest group in the middle, for some things that may seem okay if things are average, but I would argue that in this case, if you're sort of in the middle and mediocre about being prepared, then I would say that you're not prepared. And there's obviously things that we should be doing and thinking about to try to get better at this. And I think that's really what the point of today's session is today. And so, Ben, maybe you could start just walking us through how do organizations start thinking about this challenge that they're clearly facing, but know that they're facing and want to change.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks everybody for joining today. So you're spot on that there is a lot of room for improvement here when it comes to really equipping your employees and equipping your organization to take on skill challenges of the future. The good news of that, and what I hope people take to heart a bit, is that most organizations are sort of in the same boat in terms of their maturity around this right now. A lot of clients and a lot of companies, I think, if you listen to a lot of the sort of skills and talent ecosystem, people are talking about some advanced things, skill ontologies and marketplaces and things like that. And I think some folks, the reaction is to think, well, we're behind and we need to take on this massive undertaking to try and catch up. But the reality is most people are in about the same place with this. They're doing some things well, they're not doing other things well. So I think take heart in that any steps that you take moving forward are going to put you in the right place. You're not behind. This isn't a panic statistic that we're putting out in front of you, so much as take comfort in the fact that we're all figuring this out together. Now, in terms of how we recommend people start eating this elephant, so to speak, is really start small and start simple as you look to grow from wherever you are in this journey, whether you are at the 1 or at the 5. It's important to be intentional and prioritize and create value in a way that you can control and that you can demonstrate, and then grow from there. One of the places where we see a lot of organizations struggle a bit as they move into this skills-based strategy is trying to do it all at once. We need to do all things skills all the time. We need to get it all set up right now. It won't work. I hate to bear the bearer of that bad news, but where clients are much more successful is when they are intentional and they prioritize and they really build that momentum internally, and they have that demonstrable use case that they can take to the rest of the organizations. They see the power of skills, see what we're doing here, and then land and expand from there and take it to that next level. So talked a little bit about how some organizations sometimes go awry, and I do want to start a bit with that. Is before we get into what we should do, also want to call out some things that we would recommend you don't do as you start to move your way up that maturity model, and as you start to move from the 1s and the 2s all the way up to the 5s. A lot of skill strategies falter, first and foremost, because they are not very clearly and intentionally aligned to the business strategy and the value. A lot of times in L&D circles, you hear conversations around, is L&D aligned to the business? But even that distinction is problematic because it makes it seem like L&D is not the business. L&D is the business. We are a critical part of what it takes for business to succeed. And it's important that we have that seat at the table and that we can very clearly draw a hard line between what are the skills that we are developing, what are the work that we are doing to grow and develop our employees, and how is that directly impacting bottom line and the success of strategic initiatives at the organization. So we can't have skills for skills' sake, just the sort of fluffy thing going on in the background, but disconnected from what the business is actually trying to achieve. They need to be in lockstep. The other place where we see some early stage skill initiatives go awry is, and talked about this a bit on the prior slide, of too much too fast. They are overly complex, they're trying to cover too much ground, or they are overly rigid and do not account for the sort of rate of change of everyday business, something that we've all had to grow accustomed to. Things are not getting simpler, they're getting more complex, change is happening faster, and we need to account for that in the way that we approach skills. Time to implementation. You see this a lot when it comes to things like taxonomy work, where, okay, before we can start developing skills, we need to build out this massive taxonomy, and it's going to take a year, and then it winds up taking 2 years. Or before we can start moving with skills, we have to gather all the data under the sun before we can make any decisions. The issue is when you take so long to implement, by the time you roll out what you set out to roll out, it's already out of date, because again, we mentioned this rate of change, this speed of business that we need to adjust to. So what we want to think about is, yes, we want to build for tomorrow. Yes, we want to build these broader, more complex things around skills, but what can we do short term? What can we create value with quickly to make sure that we are engaging stakeholders and demonstrating that value? Another piece, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on today, is really defining clear actions and next steps from the stakeholders. A lot of times, learning or HR or talent will craft sort of a skill strategy or a tool or a framework or a piece of technology, but the rest of the organization who doesn't live and breathe this in the way that we do doesn't necessarily know where or how they're supposed to interact with it. What are they supposed to take action on moving forward? How is this supposed to enable and make their lives easier, as opposed to be something else we're putting on their plate? And then lastly is sort of going along to that is it's just disconnected from the day-to-day realities of employees, where either there is a misalignment between what is being prioritized versus what is the actual pain point of the employees, or the way and the frequency and the modalities in which we're trying to engage with employees don't align with the flow of work and don't align with how they're actually moving through their work day to day. If we're trying to ask them to do something that feels irrelevant or participate in a way that just does not align with the realities of their schedule and the way that they like to learn and the way that they like to engage, it's going to fall flat. So hopefully some of these, well, hopefully or not hopefully, sounded familiar. As a lot of you have maybe been in this industry for a while, you may have run into these before. So would love to just do a quick poll of the audience of if any of these 5 resonated with you, if you run into one of these pitfalls or had challenges with this in the past as you take a stride forward in your skills journey.
Yeah, and as people are participating in that poll, I think it's I thought your points on the alignment with the business is very spot on, and the idea that, you know, really trying to come to that conclusion that L&D is the business as a part of the business is key. And I just think, you know, as you said at the beginning, this isn't an overnight thing where you know, oh, we're all in the same boat, but we all have to fix this massive thing by tomorrow. This whole thing is a journey, and I think part of that journey is building that relationship so that, you know, first you become that partner to the business, but then that then develops into that, you know, a part of the business relationship. But it's so key to all of this is by taking that journey, you're going to create that alignment that's going to make the rest of this stuff sort of fall into place. I think it's a great point to make.
Yeah, and I think it's very analogous to, you know, training for a marathon or losing weight, or, you know, that health analogy is pretty apt, because it just doesn't happen overnight, and you need to be realistic about what you can achieve and how quickly you can achieve it. If you try to do too much too fast, you either get frustrated by the results or you kind of burn out and give up entirely. So really being intentional and really, you know, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's something that's we're gonna build on incrementally. Yeah, take too long to implement. I'm not surprised. I would say this is one where we've all been down this path of we have a good idea or we have a solution, and then we involve this part of the business, or we involve these stakeholders, and then so-and-so needs to sign off on it, and then IT needs to sign off on it. And next thing you know, months have gone by, or even years in some cases. So we need to plan for this. And this goes back to this idea of starting small and starting simple. As much as you can keep the room small and really control what you can control to make sure that you can create that initial value and build that test use case. It's going to be incomplete. It's not going to have everybody involved who eventually will need to be involved. But it's a lot easier to get those people involved once you've taken that first step and you've started to show what this could be. Involving everybody in the beginning before it's clear what we're doing or what we're going to achieve from this just bogs everything down and really gets stuck. So where we're seeing a lot of clients be successful is really trying to simplify skills to the extent of, rather than, boil the ocean list of skills or competency frameworks or things like that, really working with business partners to identify, maybe even for a specific business unit at first, not for the entire organization, but for a specific business unit, go to the leaders of that organization or that business unit. And the question can be as simple as, if your people could get better at 2 things, what are those 2 things that would make all the difference if we could just lift all boats on these 2 topics? And then that's your skill strategy. That it can be that simple, and it can be that quick, and it can be that nimble. Grow those 2, create the value with those 2, and then expand your list from there, or expand to the other business units from there. But really, keep it that narrow and keep it that simple at first, and then build into your platform how you're going to expand and how you're going to increase that complexity and increase that sophistication, but don't start trying to achieve that right out of the gate. So again, just kind of quick summary of, top 5 things we really want you to keep in mind as you move forward with your skills journey is, whatever you build, whatever you embark upon, whatever the strategy or the initiative is, we want to ensure that it's business aligned, that it is very simple and simple to everybody involved, so that everyone can sort of understand what it is, what it's going to do, and how it's going to create value. Make sure that you're building agility into your process. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be curveballs. The first test isn't going to go how you want it to go. So build for that speed. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Get it out there, get it moving. Make sure it's actionable, especially when you think about things like data or leadership engagement that you might need in that. Be very specific of kind of what you expect people to do with the outputs of this. And then lastly, just really think employee centric. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on, but make sure that the employees sort of are our customers, and are we building a solution that is going to fit their needs and serve them in the way that they're going to be most likely to engage with, rather than solve our problem first and then try and drag the employees into that solution.
Yeah, and it's funny, we were looking at the poll, and the time comes up, it takes too long to implement, and we look at our research, we see often when we ask about challenges that companies are facing, why is it so hard to implement your strategy, what's keeping your learning programs from being more effective, and L&D teams constantly, number one thing is that we wish we had more time, whether it's just time or part of time and resources, but that's constantly the biggest challenge. And so the reality is, I think we have to accept that that's a challenge that's going to be constant. So we can't constantly say that, well, I can't do this because I don't have time, because that time isn't coming. There isn't some 6-month window where suddenly you're going to have a surplus of time. So we have to figure out how to do these things with what we have. And that's, I think, what Ben, you're sort of talking about here, is that incremental getting started. And that's really what it's about, is picking and choosing the right moments, the places to get started, building that momentum. And it's important because I think we're seeing a lot of organizations, their idea of skills and what they need to build for the future is completely changed. We're now seeing this really important focus on things that used to be considered maybe soft skills, which is almost dismissive in description, or they've been looked at as solely the realm of leadership development, C-suite type skills that we need to build for those teams. But companies are realizing, in order for us to do all these other things and be able to respond to the changes that are occurring within our organization, within the markets that we operate in, we need these kinds of skills up and down the organization. These are the kinds of skills that make all of the other things happen. So we're looking to build things like learning agility. Can we help people learn how to learn more quickly, how to learn things that are different from what they've been learning? Can we help build on that kind of a skill? Can we help with things like design thinking and emotional intelligence that help people figure out how to approach situations? And so the truth is, yes, these are both somewhat inherent skills. Some people just have them they have them in differing levels, but they are also skills that can be developed. regardless of where people are starting from. So we're recognizing this need to do it, but these are not easy skills to build. This isn't just, here's a 30-minute course on emotional intelligence, take the test. If you get higher than 70%, you are now emotionally intelligent, end of story. These things take time. They're very complex. They're hands-on. So there's a whole new approach that has to be taken to do this. But again, the payoff in the long run is that you've got people who are much more able to respond to almost anything that can happen in the business. And look, if we look back 3 years ago and ask, in 2019, if we asked people what they thought big change meant, they probably wouldn't have come up with the global pandemic and the quickness with which it occurred. So now the idea of, okay, that's the kind of change we have to be able to respond to. So these are the kind of skills that L&D needs to build. And, Melly was actually asking a question about, priorities around, are they relevant to specific industries or and this is, across the board, cross industries, essentially even across organizational size. These are the core elements that ensure that organizations are going to have effective talent. But so let's look at a little bit about the now, getting into the approach of how do we build skills.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on that there has been a shift lately, or maybe a recognition that some of these things that were, to your point, maybe unfairly dismissed as soft skills, or that term kind of made it seem like they were fluffy or less important. People are really starting to realize that those are actually almost meta skills, in the sense that if you can build them, it makes it easier for you to build all the other skills. So things like learning agility, emotional intelligence, collaboration, digital dexterity, these are all things that are force multipliers. If you can do those things well, it actually makes it so you can do a lot of other things even better. So how can we equip people with these almost habits and mindsets that are going to allow them to more quickly build skills as we move forward, rather than play whack-a-mole with all the technical skills as they're popping up so rapidly? Let's really try to reframe how we build these muscles within people, and how we really get them to be able to take these on in the future. Another thing that stands out to me about this is the skills that are in high demand, as you mentioned, are things that are more complex. They are things that it's not just I can pass a test and therefore I have it. Learning agility is something that's going to take a while to develop. You're not going to put someone through a single course and then abracadabra, they have learning agility. This is something that needs to be introduced via traditional content or training model. Needs to be reinforced through coaching. People need to be given opportunities to learn new things, to apply that learning agility. This is something that's going to take a while to move the mountain of learning agility. So going back to this idea of keeping it simple, how are we really breaking down some of these complex things like change advocacy or emotional intelligence? And how are we simplifying these to say, well, we're not going to move the needle entirely on emotional intelligence, but this piece of it, we're going to solve that. We're going to show the change. We're going to show the value. And then we're going to add the Lego blocks from there to accomplish that broader change of developing these more complex skills. The last thing, and I think for the interest of today's audience, one of the things that I hope you'll take away from this is that a lot of these skills that are priorities for organizational talent pools are actually the same things that people within the L&D and HR space also need to be focusing on. So learning agility and design thinking in particular are actually ways that we should be thinking about our offerings as we also look to build these skills and others. So I think some of these we need to look in the mirror a little bit on and make sure that we are practicing what we preach. We are building some of these top priority skills so that we can enable it in others. So when we talk about learning agility, your approach to skills should take that same agile approach. We talked about, this idea of developing all the skills at once, or trying to boil the ocean and cover too much ground all at once, leads to stalled initiatives, lead to giving up, or things taking way too long. So a more agile approach, as you see on the screen here, is to really, again, just start with what are those most critical skills that the organization, or even, again, a specific business unit needs to succeed. Let's prioritize what are those top 1, 2, or 3, and the list should be that small, because an adult learner cannot build 10 skills at once. If you give me a job profile or a competency model that has 15 or 20 skills on it, I can't do anything with that information. You need to prioritize for me what's going to create the most value for me in the organization. Identify those critical skills, get your data, establish your baseline and targets, align your resources and experiences. It can't just be content. You also have to give people opportunity to apply with stretch assignments, mentorships, coaching, et cetera, et cetera. Really lead the change, adoption, and engagement. Don't just build it and hope that your learners show up. We really need to market these things and get people to understand why it's important for the company, but more importantly, why it's important for them. And then measure, did we move the needle? And hopefully those metrics were set out early on. And then either we moved the needle on those top 1 or 2 priority skills, and we move on to the next 2 skills, or the skills that have popped up and emerged in the marketplace while we weren't looking. Or if we still need to continue to further build and iterate and evolve, then we go back to step 1 and we say, okay, what's the next piece of the puzzle for that particular skill? But it really should be this quick and this agile, where you're prioritizing a couple of skills at a time for any given population, and really making sure that you are not putting too much on people's plate. Asking people to develop too many skills at once really means they're not actually going to meaningfully develop any of them. Building skills take time, especially those skills we saw on the prior slide. People need the room to focus and really apply. The other piece we want to think about in terms of agility is expand your army, so to speak, of who gets to own and make decisions around learning and who gets to actually pull this together. So in a more traditional model, learning and HR were sort of responsible for everything. You were the arbiters of what people learned. You were the people that had to kind of go around handing out the content and the courses and the training. But what a more modern approach and what a system like Degreed really helps enable for folks is to make everybody a part of the L&D team. It can't just be L&D trying to put out these fires and close these gaps and develop these future-ready skills. Leaders and managers also need to be empowered and understand the role they can play of identifying a skill that is a problem or an upcoming need, finding what they need to develop it, pushing it to their people with a clear explanation of why, and then seeing if they move the needle. We need to enable them to be able to help solve some of these problems on their own, and then even down to the individual. If an individual has identified for themselves a skill need, either for their current performance or for where they want to head with their career, they can't wait 3 months until the next training. How are we equipping and empowering these people to start solving these skills as soon as they encounter them or as soon as they see them? And then let's make sure that they feel like they have the opportunity to not just close those gaps, but also demonstrate, track, and really get credit for that. When it comes to strategy, this more agile and decentralized approach is also very important. So if we think about where skills strategy or where skills priorities historically were set, it was very much ivory tower. Somebody in central L&D decided these were the skills that were important for you and handed them down from on high, and they would sort of cascade down the organization. Things move too quickly now. Organizations are too large and too complex for that to still be feasible. It's still important for certain things that are organizational strategic priorities, things that apply to broad swaths of the organization, like a leadership model or values or things like that. But what we really need to balance that with is empowering teams and individuals to set and own their own skill agendas and let that influence where we need to head as an organization. Yes, there are times where a priority has to be set for the company because it's important for the entire company, but we have to make sure that we're listening for those signals that are coming from the front line to help source, to help crowdsource and to help identify what is coming down the pike. What are the people on the front lines encountering right now that we're not even aware of yet? And let's listen to those signals and make sure that informs our priority moving forward. And the last piece, we talked about design thinking. This is really, for those of you unfamiliar with design thinking, Definitely something I would encourage everyone to look into. There's lots of courses, lots of free resources online of how to undertake this. But step one is really empathy mapping. It's really putting yourself in the shoes of the recipients of sort of the problem you are trying to solve, and then building backwards from there. And I think we in L&D have not always taken that approach. Sometimes we build things that make sense to us, and we all have L&D people huddled around them, and they make sense in our environment. But we sometimes lose sight of the people we are trying to really solve problems for. So in a more L&D centric approach, things are sort of by L&D for L&D. The decisions are made top down, and there's very little agility or flexibility for people to deviate from the path set out for them. Frameworks tend to be overly complex or difficult to use. Again, we talk about taxonomies that have 30 skills per role, or competency models that are 8 pages long. These really unwieldy things that just a learner or a manager doesn't necessarily know how to leverage. A lot of skills development is compliance driven or performance based. You did something wrong, or there's a problem that we're trying to solve. It's not proactive, and it's not solving problems moving forward. And L&D tells you where and how to interact with skills and in what systems. Whereas what we want to encourage on the right side of the screen is really figuring out where our employees are ready, where do they need and want to engage with skills and receive guidance and interact with systems of record. Where is it going to be easiest for them to find and solve problems on their own? And let's build systems that meet them where they are, rather than try and drag them into systems or paths or processes that make our lives easier. Really think kind of customer focused, really own your solutions like any other product out in the market, and put your customer first, so to speak, as you're thinking through that design.
And as we're looking at this, there was a question that's sort of based on what you were just talking about, or kind of relevant there, that Fiona was wondering about. Thoughts on making L&D goal setting part of the performance management process. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, so there's always a line to be mindful of not making learning feel punitive. Learning is not the homework you get when you're in trouble. We want it to be bigger than that. So keeping that context in mind around how we integrate learning with a performance management process, the short answer to your question is yes, it absolutely should be. So as part of a performance management process, as part of a yearly or a performance review or development of an IDP, what skills are you trying to build? Should absolutely be a very clear outcome of that process, and not just an outcome, but a clear action plan. We've all had those conversations at various points in our life with a manager who has their yearly tick the box conversation with us and says, well, what you need to get better at is data visualization and stakeholder management. All right, good luck. I'll see you next year. Hopefully that got sorted out. And you're given a problem to solve, but no real support, no real tools to move it forward. So as we think about how we can connect L&D goal setting into the performance management process, 2 things that really need to happen is it can't just be about closing gaps. It has to be about, yes, maybe there's a skill you need to build to get better at your current role, but also what are the skills that are going to be of most interest to you to help you take on work that's maybe of different interest, help you expand your role within the team, go on a leadership track, maybe take on a new role in a different part of the organization. But it has to be a balance. It can't just be of these 10 categories, you ranked lowest in these 2, and therefore that's your learning homework for the next 3 months or 6 months. It can't just be closing gaps. It's got to be bigger than that. And then, as I said, the other piece is it almost feels patronizing or a bit defeating to tell learners get better at this skill and then not help them understand how to do that. So we really need to, and we'll talk about this later, managers, frontline managers and coaches are really the glue that holds a lot of this stuff together. A lot of your learning initiatives, employees really need their managers to help them with this and to be prescriptive. And they are an often neglected audience for skill initiatives. A lot of times it's the top of the organization and everybody get real excited about this, the value skills they're going to create. And then it's the actual individual contributor employees of here's the cool new technology, here's the cool new system. And that middle of the pyramid is kind of left to their own devices. And if they're not on board, if they're not supporting this, it's not going to work. So short answer, again, yes, should absolutely be part of performance management process, but there are some other steps that need to be thought about and really need to be taken to make sure it's a meaningful part of that process.
Yeah, I think it works really well in those environments where they're getting into more of the ongoing performance conversation rather than those, very spaced out interactions, because you're constantly checking in and seeing what do you need, and then, in that kind of environment, or even just an environment where you've already sort of, made that connection from business goals, performance goals, what the learning is, everything sort of lines up, then it's already about, the performance process is here. We always want you to get better at these things. Here are the tools to do it, right? It's no longer here's a punishment, or learning is something separate. It's like, as you do your job, here's a series of tools that help you do it better. And that's just how learning should be seen. So yeah, I think you're right there. It should be definitely part of the process as much as possible. But I think you make a clear distinction that it's hard to, in that traditional model, to not make things punitive before they already feel that way from the get-go, the performance management review process. So yeah, making sure that learning doesn't seem like, okay, you messed up, so now you have to do this. It's got to be a different conversation altogether. So we already talked about some of these challenges. Obviously, I said that the first one is time and resources. Everybody wishes they had more, but we are sort of at currently peak do more with less for L&D teams. Hopefully, that eases, but it's always sort of been the case. It's just sort of exacerbated right now. But I think what's more important is looking through some of the rest of this, and these things that Ben has been talking about and we'll cover here subsequently are really focused on this idea of companies are struggling with this because they don't know what the future skills that they need are yet. They haven't really had a process about how do we figure out what that is. So then they can't really understand what the gaps are. So they can't really approach what they need to do. They don't necessarily have the technology in place that support the kind of skills development that they're looking to do. So they need to focus on that. They don't have the right content in place either. And I think all these things that we're talking about here, because we get this from our organization all the time. People come to us. What are the skills and competencies I need? Give me a list. Is there a list or something I can read off? And it's less about that. I can't tell you, here's what you're going to need 6 months down the road, a year down the road. It's really about taking these concepts that Ben's talking about, these frameworks, these strategies, putting those in place, having the right technology in place, understanding how and where you should be getting your content together to do this. And then you've built this environment that can handle whatever the skills may be, right? You're putting yourself in a position to say, once we figure out what it is we need to do, we're prepared to address that, as opposed to thinking that you have to have these skill trees chiseled out in cement moving forward. So that's what the rest of these are all looking, pointing at. It's really about having the tools in place and the strategy to figure out what you're coming up on. And so you were going to talk a little bit about some of the approaches to address this.
Yes, certainly. So the one on the top, I'll speak to it a bit more in a moment. But it's also, I think, interesting to notice that while these are obviously ranked, they're not that far apart. These are pretty consistent problems all the way down. So yes, challenges abound. We need more technology. We need more time. We need more resources. We need crystal balls to figure out what the future is going to hold. We need a lot, and we're not necessarily getting a lot more. So how can we make the most of what we have? A couple things to just call out quickly on this slide, though, is identify our future skill gaps and identify the skills we need for the future, sort of same vein there. This is where partnering with the business much more clearly is going to help you talk to those people who are formulating the multi-year strategies and helping to get ahead of some of these skills. It is a lot easier to build a skill intentionally and proactively rather than put out a fire when the gap is already causing serious issues and you're just trying to, take the aspirin to lessen the pain a bit. In terms of the technology ecosystem, technology is definitely a critical part of this. So something like Degreed is going to allow you to read those skill signals that are coming from your employees, equip the leaders and the L&D people to build and to curate and to put together solutions much more quickly. But at the end of the day, technology in and of itself isn't a magic wand. It's really important to think about what is the problem we're going to solve with this technology. Let's be clear about what it is going to do and what it's not going to do. And let's make sure that as we invest in that technology, we're really thinking through how to communicate and engage all the stakeholders to play. There's nothing worse than having a shiny piece of technology and inside of it, it's just crickets because nobody was really brought on board to figure out why they're supposed to be there, what they're supposed to do with it. So while technology is a critical need, it is not a panacea. It is not, well, if we just had all the technology, then all the problems would magically be solved. It's part of it, not all of it. But I want to speak to this idea of not enough time, not enough resources, not enough headcount to solve these problems. Yes, there's no denying that. Yes, that is true. There are more problems to solve than there are resources within L&D and HR to solve right now. Things used to be a little simpler. You could simply just kind of deal with performance objectives, send out the required training, and do onboarding to help people get ready for the job. Things were a little simpler, but over time, the raiment of what learning within an organization was responsible for got much bigger. More and more things kind of came under the umbrella of learning around adaptability and wellness and resilience and inclusion and culture. Again, more, but the same team, the same resources, the same investment in technology. So the demand is, more, faster, cheaper, better, faster, cheaper, but without really a whole lot of resources, and in some cases less resources than you had when the world was simpler. So what we really want to encourage folks to do, and this goes back to this idea of how can we decentralize this and how can we empower other folks to be sort of honorary deputized members of the L&D team themselves, even if they don't have learning in their job title. We need to move from providing and being the order takers of, I need a training on this, I'm having a skill problem with this, hand out and give me that. And then you run and try to build buy for the entire organization. It's not the most efficient. It's certainly not going to move as quickly as business needs arise, and you just don't have enough people, time, and money to do that. So while there is still a time and place for the modern L&D organization to be a provider, to be building and to be creating and provide and buying the content or what have you, where you're going to gain more efficiency is by teaching people to fish, by taking the time to equip them with content and systems and processes to not submit their orders to you to go figure out how to solve their problem, but distinguishing between what is a problem that L&D actually needs to solve and what is a problem that you can solve yourself. And this works for everybody in the sense that it's going to help you prioritize and conserve your time and energy and resources and people to solve those bigger, more complex strategic problems. It's also going to remove a lot of headaches for the people closer to the business as long as we make these solutions easy, because then they don't need to jump through as many hoops. If I'm a manager of a department, I have 50 people who report to me, and I get the sense that my 50 people are not good at skill A. In a more traditional model, I would knock on L&D's door and I would dump this problem on them, and then I would hope for the best. In a more modern and empowered learning culture, we want to make sure that that manager knows that they can set that skill priority for their team. They can push that skill out to their team. They can quickly identify who's a subject matter expert in their team, who's already awesome at this, who's your go-to person. And there's always that guy down the hall or girl down the hall who's like the one everybody goes to with their questions anyway. We know who that person is. Empower them to help build and curate and identify a solution rather than, again, take it to somebody in L&D who's maybe less familiar with the business. So really thinking about how we can deliver, provide people with the tools and the know-how and the training to understand that they can help solve these problems. They can help shepherd their team forward to close skill gaps without always needing L&D to come do it for them. And that's really where you're going to create much more efficiency and preserve your time and energy and resources for those things that are really more value added activities. You become consultants to the people solving those frontline learning problems rather than being the person who has to come and be the skills fairy and solve it all for them.
Dave, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was clicking and it wasn't coming. There it goes. So, looking at this, it's we asked in one of our skills-based studies, what are the negative effects of not having these this kind of strategy in place, or these approaches? What are you seeing? This is from these organizations that say they're struggling with this, and not being able to develop these skills properly has a huge impact throughout the organization. It's not just on, say, some of these specific skills, like if I don't have this one skill, then that one thing isn't happening. It reverberates throughout the organization, starting with overall, we just don't have the employee engagement that we want. People are not feeling as though that they're invested in the work. And we know how important engagement is, however you define it, or however you look at it. You can even look at current trends, this idea of this quiet quitting, which is really sort of this kind of exposure of an engagement issue of people just not really dialed in. So if people feel as though they're being developed, they have this future, they have this path forward, this eye on how what they do and how they grow impacts not only their role and their job, but the business as well. That goes a long way. That also feeds into and is tied to retention, keeping people. That's a big challenge right now, is holding on to talent. And obviously, whenever there's a talent challenge in the marketplace, it's your top talent that has the most opportunities, right? So are we keeping our best talent? Then we talked about all of those skills in that list. Those are the kind of things that help the organization respond much more quickly to business conditions. It helps generate more creativity and innovation up and down the workforce. It's not just isolated to one or two areas. And the idea that because people are not at their full capability, that increases talent costs, because we need more people to do more things. If people had this broader set of skills and talents, we wouldn't need as many people to do those things. So there's just a lot of sort of cascading effects of not properly addressing these skills issues.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully, if you came to this, we're preaching to the choir a bit here around why skills are important. But these things are also important to take internally to help explain why other people need to be involved in this and need to help solve this problem. This isn't L&D's problem. This is a company problem that we really need to be solving here. But the other thing I want to caution against or have people think about is sometimes there is sort of a rose-colored perception of, if we start doing skills, whatever that means, we embark on a skills strategy, we become a skills-based organization, all of these things are just going to happen as sort of natural side effects. This whole list will be taken care of. But it's not it's not that easy. I hope I'm not bursting anyone's bubble, but you're not going to do all of these things in year one or even year two of your like really intense engagements around skills. So it's important to be crystal clear of, we are becoming a skills-based culture. We are really developing a robust skills strategy to solve which of these problems first, because you need to have that clarity of vision to help inform and prioritize and determine what we are and are not going to solve for right now. If we try to do this whole list, we're not really going to do any of the list. So before you do anything with your skills strategy, before you buy a piece of technology, before you start building a taxonomy, before you start a comms plan or an engagement plan or whatever, what have you, step one is, why are we doing this? What is the problem we hope that more skills or more skill development is going to solve? Could be a couple of them. Hopefully they're connected, but stop and really ask yourself that question: what is the problem we are trying to solve first? And then that needs to be your North Star and help inform your subsequent decisions. And it really needs to inform your approach to data. You're not going to get all the skills data all the time. People are only going to give you so much data. You can only ask people to fill out so many forms or rate themselves or take so many assessments. So you can't ask them for all of it. What is the data you're going to get? Where are you going to get it from? And how is it going to help you tell that story is really important to define ahead of time, rather than, well, let's just try and get all the data and then let's, kind of beat on it and hope an insight pops out. So really being intentional. So as a poll question, wanted to just get a sense of, when within your organization, skill and learning initiatives are undertaken, how often do they have clear output success metrics where at the end of this will be the value, this will be the result?
Yeah, this one interests me because this aligns well with something that we had actually asked in one of our studies, but curious to know, that's from the outset, when you're putting together this an initiative, how often are these defined metrics involved at that stage? We'll see how they respond there. I don't know if Melissa, if you want to just see how we're doing and maybe close this one, so we just in the interest of time. It looks like the sometimes and rarely crew have carried the day, which, in thinking of our research, is not surprising, because we asked a similar question, what percentage of your learning programs are built with clear defined metrics, and it wasn't very many. And so it just shows, and it's so that, again, going back to your point, Ben, that most organizations are in this very large boat together, that there isn't a lot of this sort of, what do we do from a measurement standpoint at the beginning of the program? It's typically looked at as this end point of, well, measurement, we'll get to that once we're done and everyone's taken it, then we'll measure. And then they get there and they realize, I don't know what I'm supposed to measure, so I'll just see if everybody finished it and if they liked it.
Yeah, and part of why this is important, first off, we need to demonstrate value of what we're doing. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we all here as part of the organizations that we belong to? We have to be able to show value. But it's also really important to help with that simplicity and that clarity of moving quickly. When you have a clear vision statement of, this is the problem that we are going to solve as it relates to skills, and here's how we're going to know if we're solving it, it makes things move a lot more quickly, because you can always come back to those and say, is this going to solve this problem or alter this KPI? If no, then we're not going to deal with that right now. And we're going to table that and we're going to come back to that some other time. But really being clear on what is the very specific problem you're trying to solve and how we know we're solving it, it's going to takes a little bit of time on the front end, but it's going to make things a lot simpler, a lot clearer, and a lot more valuable as you move forward. Again, in the interest of time, I'll start to move a little bit more quickly. But again, before you start building anything, really stop and ask, why are we doing this? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And how will we know that we're going to solve it? And then how are we connecting the learning metrics to business metrics? So we put everybody through a boot camp course and they all loved it. They said a 4 out of 5, they had a good time. What is the actual change in behavior? What is the business result? What is the impact on employee retention or internal mobility or all these other things? We have to connect it to some sort of a dollars and cents business metric at the end. Otherwise, it can be perceived as just learning for learning's sake. We always have to take that next step of, so what? Everybody took the course. Everybody said it was a great course. So what? What happened next? What did they do differently? And why was it valuable? David, these were just a couple summary key strategies from the overall Brandon Hall research.
Yeah, and I think it just comes back to, you brought this up, and it gets hard to understate or overstate, I'm sorry, the idea, the role managers need to play in this whole process, providing more feedback and coaching to their employees. There really are that conduit between what the business needs and what people can do or should be doing. When learning wants to build these kinds of experiences and really target the programs to reinforce and allow people to learn as part of their daily work. managers are the ones that know what that daily work looks like. They know what people are responsible for on a day in, day out basis. And they know where learning fits within all that. Whereas, the executives or even the learning team may not. So really important to emphasize the manager's role. That sort of, there needs to be alignment about how to do this. That sounds very basic, but starting at the beginning of this is everyone in agreement, and I think when you were talking about this at the beginning, but having that alignment from the top at first to say this is how we're going to do this and everyone's bought in, that makes it just much that easier, so the consistency doesn't fall off as the process moves through the chain of the organization. Getting that long range plan into how we're going to figure out what the talent pool needs to look like, what shape should it take, and then what challenges do we address through acquisition, hiring, and what challenges do we address through skills, upskilling, reskilling, and figuring out what that plan is, making sure everyone has sort of an individual development plan, and those don't need to be set in stone, but something that aligns with what everyone thinks it should be happening, and then those are visited as part of that that ongoing conversation to make sure that we can change direction when necessary. And then, managers and employees are aligned. You'd be surprised. We look at our research, how few managers have a direct line of insight into their teams, IDPs, which, they're the ones, again, on a daily basis that are working with these folks. So just important things to keep in mind. And I think coming back to the point you were making previously, Ben, there was a question that came in, or sort of an observation. Mona saying they have a lack of good correlative data, right? They can get completions and some level 1 data, but not really how it reinforces skills or the business impact. And I think this is what you and I have been trying to address throughout this. And I know it's not as simple as sometimes make it sound, but really, if you start to think about that thing, if these initiatives are developed with those key metrics in mind, like this is what somebody should be able to do. Here's how they should be behaving. Here is the skill that they should be able to exhibit. If you've identified what that is with the business, and the business can say, I know what that looks like. When that is happening, here's what it looks like. These 4, 5, 6, 3 things happen when that is occurring. Now that's what we need to look for. That's what we need to measure against. So still collect that completion, that level 1. That stuff's important because it works when you correlate it, as you pointed out, with the things that are happening downstream. So now you can say, oh, we have a 92% completion rate. Those 92%. When we look at what they're doing these things. When I look at the 8% that didn't complete, they're doing these things. Maybe they're doing them differently. And there's a clear sign that, okay, the completion matters. Or maybe there is no difference and there's something else to be addressed. But it's really about starting at the beginning of, if somebody engages with this learning element, whether it's a full-blown course, one small little piece, if they do this, we expect that these are the things that they should know. These are the things that they should do or do differently, whatever it is. And then somebody needs to understand how to identify that those things are happening. Easy to talk about, a little bit harder to do.
And the other reason to do that at the beginning is there is some data that you can only get in the beginning unless you have a time machine. If you wait until after the course is done and, we'll send out a survey asking their managers if their people are, better at this skill. But if you didn't benchmark that before you started the intervention, it's very difficult to show that delta. Or there are data sources or places where you could get data, but they only happen a couple times a year. They only happen in specific systems you might not have access to. So if you wait until it's all said and done to start scrambling to pull all this together, it just doesn't make for a very compelling story. You need to, when somebody's writing a novel, they don't just start writing on page 1. They think about, all right, how's the plot going to work? How is chapter 1 going to connect to chapter 2? How are we going to tell that story? And that's where we really need to think ahead of time. I know we're running short on time, but I did want to just echo, and we've already said it a couple of times, but it bears saying again, manager involvement is really critical to making or breaking all of this. If you get your managers thinking and talking and doing skills, everything else is sort of on easy mode. It just really is that glue that's going to make all of your other things either easier or more difficult. So start with them, make sure they are a priority audience, but be mindful of what you're asking them to do and how easy you are making them to do it and how they are being rewarded for doing it. It has to be something that they can use quickly and easily, and it has to be something that is going to enable them to do their work better. So Degreed has a great tool called Skill Coach, which allows managers to see sort of real-time skill analytics for their employees. And that data is important. Managers can't be expected to remember all however many direct reports they have, who's working on what. We need to equip them with systems and with tools to help them understand where their employees, where are they prioritizing, so that I can coach them in the moment rather than trying to remember what form got filled out 5 months ago by somebody else. So additional stats here, again, we'll send all these out, but in the interest of time, absolutely, managers are arguably the most critical stakeholder, apart from the learner, of course, in making this all go well.
We did manage to answer the questions as they came in, so we appreciate that, everyone that had sort of submitted through the chat your thoughts and questions, and hopefully responded to all of that. I know we are at the top of the hour, and I just wanted to thank you, Ben, so much for bringing your thoughts and insights to everyone today, as well as Reed for giving us you and the hour itself to share with folks. So again, thanks to everyone for participating and taking part in the polls. And with that, I don't see any other questions coming in, Ben, so I'll just turn it to you for any last words.
No, just thank you all for attending. Feel free to reach out to us at Degreed or myself. That'll all be coming through in the follow-up materials. And best of luck as you continue on in your skills journey.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We hope to see you again on another webinar. Thank you.